The wind was the first thing she noticed. It howled across the Wyoming prairie like it was trying to warn her. Dust swirled around the stagecoach wheels as it creaked to a stop in the middle of a lonely settlement. Eleanor Whitaker pressed her gloved hand against the door, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. 6 weeks on the trail, 2,000 miles from Boston. A folded letter tucked inside her coat, a plain gold ring waiting for a hand she had never held. While when she stepped down into the dirt, no groom stood waiting, only silence, and a freshly turned grave on a hill beyond the town. The year was 1878. Clearwater Bluff was little more than a row of sun-bleached buildings leaning into the wind. A trading post, a saloon with bat-wing doors, a narrow hotel with a crooked sign, and a small church sitting crooked beneath a wide sky. Eleanor stood alone in the street beside her 2 trunks. "Mr. Nathaniel Grayson was meant to meet me," she said to the driver. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "From Red Willow Ranch." The driver didn't look her in the eye. "You best speak to Sheriff Boone Mercer," he muttered, nodding toward a small office with a faded star nailed above the door. A cold feeling slid into Eleanor's stomach. Inside the sheriff's office, the air smelled of tobacco and dust. Sheriff Mercer was a broad man near 50, gray in his beard and tired in his eyes. Yet he stood the moment he saw her. "You're Miss Whitaker," he said quietly. "Yes." She swallowed. "Where is Mr. Grayson?" The sheriff removed his hat. 3 days ago, ma'am, Nathaniel Grayson was ambushed 15 miles east while driving cattle. Him and 2 other ranchers. None survived." The room tilted. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "You're saying—" Her throat burned. "He's dead?" "Yes, ma'am." The word fell like a hammer. And she had crossed a continent to marry a man she knew only through letters. Letters filled with steady handwriting and bold dreams. He had written of partnership, of respect, of building something together beneath an open sky. She had never seen his face. The sheriff's voice softened. "Funeral's tomorrow. We can book you on next week's stage back east, if you wish." Back east. Back to Boston, where her father's debts had swallowed their home. Back to a teaching post already filled. And back to narrow streets and narrower futures. Eleanor lifted her chin. "What happens to Red Willow Ranch?" she asked. Sheriff Mercer studied her, surprised. "No will," he said. "No kin. Bank will likely take it. Or one of the larger outfits nearby." "We were to be married," she said. She drew Nathaniel's last letter from her reticule. "He promised me a life there." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Without papers. As the law won't see you as having claim." Eleanor looked down at the ink on the page, at the lines where he had written, "I don't need a housekeeper. I need a partner with backbone." The dream had died before it could begin, but something else rose up inside her. "I want to see it," she said. "See what?" "The ranch." The next morning she stood at the edge of Boot Hill Cemetery while the preacher spoke over 3 pine boxes. Wind whipped her skirt around her ankles. She did not cry loudly, and she did not wail. She stood still, grieving a man she had never touched but had trusted with her whole future. Beside her stood a widow with 3 small children. The woman's name was Margaret Hale. Her husband had been killed in the same ambush. "Most folks would turn back east," Margaret said quietly when once the service ended. "Most folks didn't sell everything they owned to get here," Eleanor replied. Margaret studied her face. "You staying?" "I haven't decided." But even as she said it, and she knew, 2 days later, Sheriff Mercer drove her out to Red Willow Ranch. They crested a low ridge around noon, and there it was, a green valley cupped between rolling hills, a narrow creek cutting through bright pasture, a sturdy log cabin, a small barn, a corral. 60 head of cattle grazing unaware of the loss of their owner. Eleanor's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered. As they rode closer, she saw the signs of sudden absence. A bucket by the well, firewood stacked neat, and a chair on the porch angled toward the sunset. Inside the cabin, everything was in order. Floor swept, dishes washed, a ledger open on the desk. The last entry read, "Bought white paint for cabin trim. Eleanor arrives next week." Her knees nearly gave way. He had prepared this home for her. She ran her fingers along the rough wood table, the stone hearth, the bed built strong and simple in the back room. "Miss Whitaker," the sheriff said gently, "this life ain't easy, and it ain't safe." She closed the ledger slowly. "I'm staying," she said. The sheriff blinked. "You can't mean—" "I crossed 2,000 miles for this land. I won't let it be swallowed by the man who wanted it. You don't even know how to run cattle. Then I'll learn." The first night alone at Red Willow Ranch was the longest of her life. Coyotes howled from distant ridges. Wind moved through the cottonwoods like whispered warnings. And she lay in her travel dress atop the straw mattress, staring at the ceiling beams Nathaniel had cut with his own hands. Grief washed over her in quiet waves. But beneath it, something steady formed. Resolve. At dawn, she rose before the sun. The air was cold and smelled of sage and wet earth. Nathaniel's horse, a chestnut gelding named Ranger, lifted his head from the corral when she approached. "I suppose we'll have to learn together," she murmured. She fed him clumsy but determined, and burned her first batch of biscuits, studied the ledger as if it were a textbook. By noon, she had made a list, learned to ride Western style, gather every stray cow before they drifted, file a continuation claim on the homestead, and above all, survive. Help came sooner than she expected. 2 riders approached from the north that afternoon. A woman in her 40s with steady eyes and a young man, broad-shouldered and wary. "My name's Ruth Carter," the woman called. "Our land borders yours, and heard you mean to stay." "I do," Eleanor answered, holding a shotgun that felt heavier than it should. Ruth glanced at the way Eleanor gripped it. "You ever fired one of those?" "Not at a man." Ruth gave a short nod. "Good. Let's keep it that way." They helped her round up the first scattered cattle that day. The work was brutal. Eleanor fell from the saddle twice. Her legs shook. Her palms blistered. But she did not quit. By sunset, 40 head were back inside the north pasture. You're stubborn," Ruth said as they leaned on the corral fence. "I've been called worse." Ruth's mouth twitched. "You'll need more than stubborn. Drayton Crowley owns the double spur east of here. He wanted this valley, offered Grayson money for it. He don't take kindly to refusal." The name settled heavy. "And if I refuse?" Eleanor asked. Ruth met her eyes. "Then you'd best be ready." 3 days later, Drayton Crowley rode into her yard. He was tall, silver at the temples. He dressed better than any man, had a right to be in cattle country. 2 hard-faced riders flanked him. "Miss Whitaker," he called smoothly, "my condolences. I made Mr. Grayson a generous offer for this spread before his unfortunate end. I'm prepared to extend the same to you." "I'm not selling," his smile thinned. "You're alone. This land requires strength." I have it. You misunderstand me. His gaze swept the cabin, the herd, the creek. Out here, accidents happen, fences break, cattle vanish, people disappear. The threat hung plain as day. Eleanor felt fear rise like smoke in her chest, but she did not step back. If you had any hand in what happened to Nathaniel Grayson, she said clearly, you should pray I never find proof. For a flicker of a second, his mask slipped. Then he smiled again. You have 1 week to reconsider. He turned his horse and rode off in a cloud of dust. Eleanor stood in the yard long after they disappeared. Wind pulled at her braid. Her heart pounded. She understood now. Nathaniel had not died by chance, and if she stayed, she would be next. But as she looked over the valley glowing gold in the falling sun, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not run. She would fight. And Red Willow Ranch would not be taken without a war. Eleanor did not sleep much after Drayton Crowley rode away. Every creak of the cabin sounded like a boot on the porch. Every gust of wind made the shutters rattle, like a warning. She kept the shotgun close in the lamp low, sitting at Nathaniel's desk with his ledger open, reading his numbers like they were a map out of a wilderness. He had been careful. He had planned. He had believed there would be time. In the bottom drawer, beneath folded deeds and cattle tallies, she found a half-finished letter in his clean handwriting. My dear Eleanor, by the time you arrive, I pray this trouble has passed. A man named Drayton Crowley has been pressing me to sell. I refused him. Twice. Last week, 2 steers turned up shot dead near the east line. Sheriff Mercer says he can't prove a thing. But I know what I know. If anything happens before you get here. The words trailed off. The ink smeared like his hand had paused too long. And Eleanor set the paper down and stared into the dim room. Crowley had not just wanted the land. He had wanted Nathaniel gone. At dawn, she saddled Ranger and rode into Clearwater Bluff alone. The prairie was wide and empty, the kind of empty that made a person feel small. Her cheeks stung from the cold. Her hands ached around the reins, but she kept her back straight, the way she had been taught as a girl, even when fear sat heavy in her chest. Sheriff Boone Mercer looked up when she stepped into his office. You shouldn't be riding alone, he said. Neither should a woman be buried before she ever marries, Eleanor replied, then softened her tone. I need to file a claim, a continuation on Mr. Grayson's homestead. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You've been reading law books in that cabin? I've been reading his ledger, his papers, and his letters. He wrote me as his intended wife, and I came here for that purpose. Mercer exhaled slowly. The land office man passes through the hotel on Mondays. He'll be here in 4 days. Then I'll be ready in 4 days, she said. And Sheriff, I need you to hear something else. She told him about Crowley's visit, the thin smile, the plain threat. Mercer's face darkened like a storm front. Crowley's got reach, he said. Money, friends, hired hands. Folks don't cross him unless they have a death wish. Eleanor kept her gaze steady. Nathaniel crossed him. The sheriff's jaw tightened. I'll ride out to Red Willow tomorrow. Take a look around. But you hear me, Miss Whitaker. If danger comes, you run. You don't stand your ground against men who don't fear the gallows. Eleanor nodded like she agreed. But in her heart, she already knew she would not run. Not again. When she rode back to Red Willow, Ruth Carter was waiting at the corral fence with her son, Cole. Cole was in his early 20s, quiet and sharp-eyed, and with hands that looked made for rope and rail and hard work. You went to town, Ruth said. I needed papers started. Ruth studied her. And you're still here, so I reckon Crowley didn't scare you off. He tried. Cole shifted his weight. He'll try again. Eleanor looked out over the pasture where the herd grazed. Then we need this ranch to look alive, not abandoned, not weak. Ruth nodded once. There's a young hand coming today. Nathaniel hired him for spring work. If he shows, you keep him. As if the land itself heard her, hoofbeats sounded on the far trail before noon. A slim young cowboy rode in on a gray horse, dust on his hat brim, and a bedroll tied behind his saddle. He stopped at the yard like he wasn't sure he belonged there. Ma'am, he said, pulling his hat off. Name's Toby Knox. Mr. Grayson hired me for the season. Sheriff told me what happened. I'm sorry you had to hear it that way, Eleanor said. Toby nodded, face tight. My Grayson was a good man. Taught me plenty last summer. If you're keeping the ranch running, I'll stay, if you'll have me. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like one small plank laid down across a deep river. I'll have you, she said. Same wages, same terms. Toby's shoulders dropped a fraction. Yes, ma'am. That afternoon, they worked the east fence line. Ruth rode with them. Cole moved ahead, scanning ridges like he expected trouble to rise out of the grass. Eleanor learned quickly what she did not know. Fence work tore at her hands. The wire bit. The posts were heavier than they looked. Her back screamed by sunset. But she kept going, jaw clenched, breath steady. Toby watched her quietly. You don't have to prove you're tough every minute, he said at last. Eleanor drove the last staple into the post and stood, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. Out here, Ned, I do. Toby nodded like he understood. They reached the far corner marker near a shallow dip where Red Willow Creek bent toward Crowley's land. The ground was torn up, as if hooves had churned it hard. Cole crouched and touched the dirt. Fresh, he said. Riders came through here, maybe last night. Eleanor's stomach tightened. How many? Cole squinted at the tracks. Hard to say. 3, maybe 4. They weren't chasing cattle, they were watching. Ruth's mouth set hard. Crowley's measuring you. The next morning, Sheriff Mercer arrived with his deputy, a lanky man named Eli Pruitt. They walked the property with Eleanor and Toby, while Ruth and Cole stayed within sight. Mercer stopped at the churned ground near the creek. Tracks, he said, voice low. Yes. Mercer looked toward the east hills, eyes narrowed. Crowley's men don't usually ride that sloppy, not if they want to be unseen. Eli Pruitt shifted uneasily. Unless it ain't Crowley's men. Mercer's gaze sharpened. You thinking what I'm thinking? Eli nodded. There's a crew been working the territory for near 2 years, robbing stages, running off cattle, worse. Folks call their leader Ash Calder. Eleanor felt cold spread down her spine. Is he the one who ambushed Nathaniel? Mercer didn't answer right away. That silence was answer enough. They haven't been caught? Eleanor asked. The territory's too wide, Mercer said. Well, and they move like smoke, but if Crowley's hired them... He trailed off and spat into the dirt. That's a brand of evil I don't like to name without proof. Eleanor pulled Nathaniel's half-finished letter from her pocket and handed it to him. Mercer read it slowly, his face hardening with each line. This ain't proof, he said, folding it back. But it's a start. Eleanor leaned closer, voice firm. Then help me make proof. The sheriff looked at her long and careful. Ma, you're thinking bait, he said. I'm thinking trap she replied. Crowley came to scare me off. If he sends Ash Calder again, he'll threaten me. He'll try to push me into selling. If you hear it with your own ears, you can take him. Mercer shook his head. If Calder rides in, talk won't be the first thing he uses. That's why you hide men on the property, Eleanor said. In the barn, in the cottonwoods by the creek, in the root cellar. And you keep me alive long enough to get what you need. Ruth Carter's eyes narrowed. You're too green for this. Eleanor met her gaze. I'm green, not foolish. I know the risk. But if I do nothing, I lose this ranch anyway. Or I die later, alone, with no witnesses. Toby's face was pale. Miss Whitaker. Eleanor looked at him gently. You don't have to stay for this. I won't hold it against you. Toby swallowed, then shook his head. Mr. Grayson treated me fair. And I'm staying. Mercer stared at all of them, weighing the room like it was a verdict. Finally, he nodded once. All right, we do it. But we do it my way. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Eli Pruitt boarded windows into narrow slits. Mercer marked hiding places and hand signals. Ruth brought extra rifles from her ranch and showed Eleanor how to hold her breath before she fired. Toby stacked ammunition and kept the horses ready. On Sunday evening, Eleanor rode into town and planted a rumor the way Ruth told her to. At the trading post, she spoke loud enough for listening ears. My uncle back east sent money, she said, laying coins down for fence supplies and a fresh can of white paint. He believes Red Willow will be one of the finest small spreads in the territory. The shopkeeper's eyes lit up. The story spread like fire in dry grass. By the time Eleanor rode home, the wind had changed. It carried dust from the east, and with it a feeling she could not shake, that someone was already riding toward her. That night, Eleanor sat at Nathaniel's desk and wrote in the ledger, for the first time, with her own hand. May 10th, 1878. Fixed East Line fence. Rumor planted in town. Sheriff Mercer set positions. Waiting. She set the pen down and listened to the prairie. Coyotes yipped far off. Cottonwoods sighed along the creek. And then, faint but certain, came the distant drum of hooves. Eleanor rose slowly and picked up the shotgun. Outside in the dark, riders were coming. The riders came in at first light. Eleanor stood on the porch with her back straight and her hands steady on the shotgun. The air smelled of cold sage and damp earth. Wind tugged at her braid like it wanted to pull her inside. Ranger stamped in the corral, uneasy, as if he knew trouble by scent. 6 men rode into the yard like they owned it. The one in front wore a dark coat and a red neckerchief. His eyes were hard and amused at the same time. Eleanor did not need the sheriff to tell her his name. The way the others followed his lead said it plain. Ash Calder. Beside him rode a man Eleanor had never seen up close, but she recognized him anyway from Ruth's description. Fine coat, clean gloves, a posture that belonged in an office, not in dust and dung. Drayton Crowley had come in person to watch her bend. Ash Calder reined in 20 yards from the porch. "Well now," he called, voice carrying easy across the yard. "Now, the bride from Boston still thinks she can play rancher." Eleanor kept her voice calm. "You're trespassing." Calder laughed, low and mean. "Trespassing is what poor folks call it when rich folks show up." He tipped his chin toward Crowley. "Your neighbor here made a generous offer. You keep refusing. That makes men nervous." Crowley's pale eyes swept the ranch like he was pricing cattle. "Miss Whitaker," he said, smooth as oil. I came to save you from a hard lesson. This land is not yours. Sign it over, take my money, go back east, and live." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the shotgun stock. "Nathaniel Grayson refused you, and then he died." Crowley's smile did not move his eyes. "Men die out here every day." Ash Calder leaned forward in his saddle, grin widening. "Your groom didn't just die, miss. He got corrected. He made the mistake of thinking a small man can stand against a big one." Eleanor felt her stomach twist, but she held his gaze. "Ma, corrected for what?" "For refusing a fair deal," Calder said, like it was simple. "Crowley wanted that valley. Grayson wanted to keep it. So we took the problem off the board." The words hit the yard like a slap. Eleanor saw it in the flicker of Crowley's eyes, a flash of annoyance. Calder was talking too much. Calder didn't care. Men like him liked the sound of their own power. Eleanor forced her voice to stay steady. "You're admitting you killed him." Calder's smile turned sharp. "I'm admitting the world is built by men who take what they want." Crowley's jaw tightened. "That's enough." Eleanor took a slow step forward onto the porch boards. The wood creaked under her boots. She wanted them to hear it. She wanted them to feel that she was not hiding. "So this is your offer," she said, looking at Crowley. "You send killers to threaten me until I sign." Crowley leaned down in his saddle, eyes cold. "Here is my offer. $3,000, but by tomorrow morning. But you sign the ranch to me. You leave. If you refuse, Mr. Calder will make sure you never trouble me again." Ash Calder nodded, pleased. "That's right. One day. After that, ranch accidents happen. Fires, missing cattle, a lonely woman found dead in a creek." Silence followed, thick as smoke. Eleanor's heart beat hard against her ribs, but her face stayed still. She could feel Sheriff Mercer out there somewhere, hidden with his men. She could feel Ruth and Cole holding their breath. And she needed one more clear line, something no judge could ignore. She lifted her chin. "And Nathaniel Grayson, was his death an accident too?" Crowley's patience snapped for a moment. "Grayson was stubborn. He forced my hand." There it was, a confession dressed in pride. Eleanor's throat went dry. She saw Ash Calder glance sideways at Crowley as if he tasted the shift in the air. The outlaws did not look relaxed anymore. And they looked like men who suddenly realized they might be standing in the wrong yard. Sheriff Mercer's voice cut through the stillness. "Drayton Crowley, you're under arrest." Mercer stepped out from the barn with his rifle raised. Eli Pruitt appeared near the cottonwoods by the creek. Two townsmen rose from behind the woodpile. Their weapons were steady. Their faces were set. Ash Calder cursed and yanked his revolver. The yard exploded. Gunshots cracked like thunder. A dust jumped from the ground. A bullet punched into the porch post inches from Eleanor's head and splintered wood into her hair. She dove behind the water trough as lead chewed the air around her. Cole fired from the barn corner, quick and clean. One of Calder's men screamed and fell off his horse. Ruth's rifle barked from behind the corral rail, forcing the outlaws back from the open yard. Crowley tried to bolt. He spurred his horse toward the road, face twisted with panic. No longer smooth or controlled. Eli Pruitt fired a warning shot that spooked Crowley's mount into a wild rear. Crowley hit the dirt hard, arms flailing, and for the first time Eleanor saw him as he truly was. Not a king, just a man. Ash Calder saw Crowley down and snarled like a wolf. "You fools," he shouted at his men. "Get Crowley, get him up. We ride out with him or we don't ride at all." Calder sprinted for the cabin. He moved fast, using the smoke and noise. Eleanor glimpsed his dark coat as he hit the steps. Sheriff Mercer raised his rifle, but held fire. The cabin was behind Calder. A bad shot could kill someone inside. Calder kicked the door open and vanished into the house. A single gunshot sounded from within. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Then Calder burst out again, hauling Crowley by the collar like a sack of grain. Calder's revolver was pressed to Crowley's temple. Crowley's eyes were wide and wild, a fear pouring out of him in sweat and shaking breath. "Drop your guns," Calder bellowed, "or Crowley dies right here." Sheriff Mercer froze, rifle still up. "Think, Ash," Mercer called. "Killing him won't save you." Calder's face twisted. "It saves me from him talking." Crowley's voice cracked as he pleaded, "Sheriff, help me. He'll kill me." Eleanor's mouth went dry. The air smelled of gunpowder and blood and hot dust. She realized the truth at the same time the sheriff did. Crowley had become a loose end. Calder would kill him, then kill anyone else he could. And then vanish into the prairie like smoke. And even if Mercer stopped him, the outlaws would come back later for revenge. For Ruth, for Cole, for Toby, for her. Eleanor slid along the trough on her knees, keeping low. She moved behind the cabin wall where the side window sat half open. She could hear Eli's rough breathing. She could hear Ranger's frantic snorts. Her hands shook. All but she forced them still around Nathaniel's revolver, the one she had practiced with until her shoulder bruised. Inside the cabin, she saw Eli Pruitt slumped against the wall, wounded but alive. Their eyes met through the gap. He gave the smallest nod, like he understood what she meant to do. Outside, Calder shouted again. 30 seconds, then I put a hole in Crowley and start on the rest of you." Crowley sobbed. "I'll tell you everything. I'll confess. I'll say I hired him. I'll say it all. Just don't let him kill me." Eleanor's breath came shallow. She thought of Boston, of narrow rooms and polite rules, of a life where women waited for permission. She thought of Nathaniel's letters, how he had wanted a partner with backbone. She thought of the grave on the hill that greeted her instead of a groom. This land had taken her future. She would not let it take her life too. Eleanor lifted the revolver to the window. She lined the sights on Ash Calder's ribs, then where his coat opened when he turned his head. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She could feel the rough wood under her palms. She whispered, "For Nathaniel." And she pulled the trigger. The shot cracked sharp. Calder jerked like he'd been punched by God. His grip loosened. Crowley stumbled forward, free. But fell hard into the dust. Calder staggered back against the porch post, shock in his eyes, then rage, then nothing at all as his knees buckled. His revolver clattered onto the boards. Sheriff Mercer and Cole rushed in at once, rifles raised, boots pounding. Mercer kicked Calder's gun away and checked his pulse with a grim face. "He's done," Mercer said. The yard fell quiet except for wind and harsh breathing. Crowley lay in the dirt, shaking like a man in winter water. Ruth stood with her rifle still raised. The eyes narrowed, ready in case any outlaw moved. Toby Knox limped out from the barn, a tear in his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him, face pale but steady. Mercer's men hauled the remaining outlaws off their horses and bound them tight. Eli Pruitt was carried out of the cabin, blood on his shoulder, jaw clenched hard, refusing to faint. Eleanor stepped onto the porch slowly. Her hands were still shaking. Her stomach felt hollow. She had taken a life. She knew she would carry that weight. But she also knew, deep in her bones, that Ash Calder would have killed them all if she had not acted. Sheriff Mercer approached her, his eyes tired but respectful. "You saved Crowley," he said quietly, "and you saved my deputy." Eleanor stared out at the valley. The creek glittered in the sun like nothing had happened. The cattle grazed on, calm and unaware. Life on the prairie kept moving, even after blood. "What happens now?" she asked. Mercer looked toward Crowley, who was being dragged to his feet. "Now we take him in," Mercer said, "and with what he said today, and what we all heard, he'll stand trial for hiring killers and forcing men off their land. He'll answer for Nathaniel Grayson." Eleanor swallowed. "And Red Willow?" Mercer's gaze softened. "After what you did to hold it, I don't reckon any land office man will doubt you belong here. We'll get your papers pushed through. Oh, we'll make it lawful." Ruth came up beside Eleanor and rested a hand on her shoulder. "You still want to stay?" Ruth asked. Eleanor thought about the grave, about the fear, about the long nights, about the hard work, the bruises, the learning, the way the ranch had begun to feel like hers in a way Boston never had. "I'm staying," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "I came here to be a wife," she went on. "I didn't get that, but I got something else. I got a place, and I got purpose, and I got a promise I intend to keep." She looked at the cabin, at the chair on the porch, at the white paint Nathaniel had bought for trim he never got to brush on. "I'll build what he wanted," she said. "A real home, a real ranch, and nobody will take it from me again." The wind rolled over the prairie, soft now, almost like a sigh. Eleanor Whitaker stood on the porch of Red Willow Ranch, not as a bride waiting for a groom, but as a woman who had claimed her own life with grit and fire. The sun dipped low, turning the valley gold, and for the first time since she arrived, the future did not feel like a grave. It felt like open land. If you love Wild West stories filled with passion and heart, like this video and subscribe to Wild West Tales of Love for new stories every single day.